So my name's Sophie, Kanabar. I used to be called Silpa Ben Datani, and I'll explain the change in name. And my story is, I guess, the whole Ugandan journey. I'm first generation from Uganda, so my parents were the immigrants or the refugees that were thrown out of Africa, and I was actually born in Africa, so I remember partial elements of the journey. We were expelled in '72 when Idi Amin obviously told pretty much the whole of the Asian population, or those with British passports, to leave the country. And I would have been five or six, turning six. So I was quite young, so young enough to remember things, and I guess young enough to forget the horrible bits as well.
What do you remember exactly?
Yeah, so I remember the snippets from Africa are quite small. So I remember having a happy life. We had a big house. My father used to have his own business, so he was doing very well in Africa. I recall living in a beautiful house, and there was lots of children within our own family, and then we had neighbours who had lots of children, so we had a big patio where we all used to play. I can remember the house. I remember that we were happy. And then the next part of the journey that I do remember is being at the airport, clinging on to my mum's sari, and just looking up at her and saying, "Where are we going, Mum?" And she looked down, she goes, "I don't know." And that's, and I get quite emotional still now, 50 years on, that stays in my head. And she said to me, "Just be strong, we'll be okay." And she was 7 months pregnant at the time. And there was myself, my 4-year-old brother, and then my 12-year-old older sister, and my father, obviously. Idi Amin had frozen all the bank accounts, so we had no money. I think we were left with £50 to leave the country. So whatever wealth my father had accumulated was frozen in a bank account that he couldn't touch. He mentioned soldiers once, that there were soldiers coming house to house to get rid of people that hadn't left. I just know he had no money. They never talked about it. It was something, I think it was too much of a trauma. They talked between themselves, but never talked to us about it. I just think it was too painful for them. But I recall when we came to England, the heartbreak all the time. In an evening when we were going to bed or asleep, they would sit beside the fire and literally just talk about Africa and how much they missed it. Things like picnics, family picnics, friends. We were comfortable. We had everything in Africa, and literally to be thrown out with just £50 in your pocket and four children, 3 children and 1 on the way. Yeah, I think it was very traumatic.
So you just feel like he ripped it apart?
He did. He literally, I think it was 28,000 people. He literally took their lives from them and stole their wealth, really, and said, "Off you go." And obviously, we'd all got British passports from when India was colonised by the British, that he just said to Britain, "They're yours." It was his own downfall, though, because, the British, or the Asians at that time, we're innate business people, and we brought a lot of economic wealth to Africa. I mean, years later, he called for us to go back, or, Africa called for us to go back, but you won't want to go back to somebody where you were thrown out of. I remember my mother thinking day to day, how are we going to manage? We didn't have much money. We were sent to camps in England, and the camps were lovely. I say lovely. The camps were purposeful. They fed us, they clothed us, they kept us warm, and then we were allocated somewhere to live. So we were allocated to live in a little village in Yorkshire, known as Ilkley, and that brings back a whole raft of trauma again for me, because it was in the 70s. There was a lot of racism. They hadn't seen people of any colour where we grew up, so we felt there was an immense amount of racism where I grew up, and I think that affected me hugely. So yes, he took our lives away. He took my mum and dad's life away. He took, what we would have inherited from my mum and dad away from us. So yes, I hold huge amounts of resentment towards Idi Amin. I think the only thing I've still got from Africa My mum had a little, what we call a murti, which is like a porcelain figure of God. So she had this little clay, it wasn't porcelain, it was clay, murti of one of my favourite gods, and I've still got that now. It's battered and it's been broken a few times, but I've still got that. We perhaps had one suitcase with a few bits in, but we haven't got any of the original things that we had in Africa. My father used to be a carpenter, so he used to work in the local factory, believe chopping up wood and sanding it down. My mother didn't work because there was 4 of us, so she spoke little English, as did my father. But what they did give us is the strength to be resilient and to be able to face challenges. And my mother at that time, because there was no temples or any faith that was of Hindu faith, she would send us to Sunday school, because she said, I'd rather you have some moral grounding, whether it be Christian moral grounding or whatever religion it was, than none at all. So she was insistent that we had education and moral upbringing. You know, when I look back, I do remember the racism because we were the only family of colour in the little village that we grew up in. And my mum faced a lot. She dressed in her traditional sari because that was her identity. She wasn't going to wear Western clothes, even though she did eventually. But there was a lot of good people. And you always remember the bad bits, but there was a lot of really good people that helped us. Some lovely people that would always ensure that, we had enough food, or made sure that we were involved in things like bonfire night. We didn't understand the traditions of England, so bonfire night and Christmas, and they sort of educated us in those areas. But it was a bit of both. I'd say there was the bad bits and the good bits, and you always remember the bad bits. When we came to England, I had to start all over again. I spent a lot of my time looking down as opposed to looking up. And what I mean by that is that I think I was ashamed of who I was, ashamed of my parents because we were so different, ashamed that we didn't have anything. I think it was only when I reached my early 30s that I really thought, actually, I'm going to start looking up. I'm going to start seeing the world, showing the world what I'm made of. And I embraced that with changing my name early on. So when I grew up in Yorkshire, a lot of people couldn't pronounce my name, and at that time it was Silperben. They used to call me Syphilis or Sipla or Super, and it was just easy to be nasty than be nice, or try and learn my name. And I know, names are a big identity thing. So I think I got fed up and just chose an English name and said, call me Sophie. Which I embrace Sophie because I think Sophie is the person I've become. But I'll never forget Silpa or Silperben standing at the airport holding on to my mum's sari. I think my mum, she knew I changed my name and she never understood why. For her, it was very much pride in who we were. So they didn't ever know. They took nicknames. So my dad was, he had a very long Asian name. It was Chotalal Govinji. And I think he called himself Danny at work because it was just easier. Nobody could pronounce his name. My mum never did. She was very proud of who she was.
What career progression did you follow?
So I didn't have the opportunity to go to university. I started work at 18, went into the banking sector, worked my way up to become... So I was in customer services because I had 3 children that were quite small. Then I worked my way up into wealth management, worked my way up into management within the banking sector, and then I went into education, which was quite interesting, bearing in mind my mum's belief in education. So I worked at South Leicestershire College, became a manager there, looking after the apprenticeship programme, and then I went on to work at Loughborough University, focusing on small business engagement and business development, and became a manager there as well, and have recently retired. So I felt as though I achieved all my goals that I wanted to achieve within my career.
So it's not held you back or anything like that. Did it make you stronger, would you say?
Definitely, yeah. I think definitely. Once I discovered my own strength, then I definitely became stronger. I think language was a big issue. So when we first came to England, I spoke obviously no English. At that time, I think I was quite dyslexic, but in those days, dyslexia wasn't picked up. Perhaps a little bit dyspraxic as well. So I found education very hard, but it's never held me back. I think it's made me more resilient and stronger. And I see the strength that my mum had to raise us, and I think that's made us. I've got 2 sisters, and it's made us very strong. And my brother he's done incredibly well in his career as well. So yeah, I think it's made us all very strong.
What kind of woman was your mum? I mean, did you ever see her cry or anything like that when it happened?
She was amazing. She was 4'0". She was a tiny petite lady. She had the strength of iron. She really did. So she never cried. Not until her dying day. I never saw her cry. She put up with a lot, from obviously losing everything in Africa to rebuilding it in England. She'd had family traumas as well. She'd had an awful first marriage, a quite difficult, marriage to my dad with all the challenges that we had. But she had tenacity, strength, and resilience. She was our guiding light to get us through. My dad, in those days, drink was an easier option than dealing with some of the challenges that we had. But she was absolutely our strength. Although she wasn't educated, didn't go to school, she taught us what we needed to learn to get by.
Can you tell us a bit about the house that you moved to in Yorkshire? Was it quite small compared to the house in Africa?
It was quite interesting because it was a council house, but it was huge. I don't think they exist anymore, so I think they allocated us a council house that we could play badminton in the living room, and that's all I remember, this living room being huge. But it was a council house, but it was beautiful. It was, and it's no longer there. We've been back to Ilkley to see if it was still there, and it's been obviously demolished. So I remember they gave us a house. It had 3 bedrooms. It was a little bit on its own, although it was a council house, and we were surrounded by, like I say, good people and bad people. Some people were lovely, and they would always say come by and say hello, and some people would just call us packies as we walked past. So it was joint memories.
And how are you celebrating the 50th anniversary? Are you doing anything to commemorate it?
That's a really good question. It's quite interesting. I posed this to my brother and sister just recently, and I said, do you realise it's 50 years? So my brother will not go back and remember those days. I think it's just too traumatic. He literally says, I don't want to think about anything before the age of 10. So he doesn't look back on it at all and doesn't want to embrace it or celebrate it. My youngest sister wasn't born, so she was born in England, but she lives in Norfolk, so she's aware of being a little bit different. She embraces it. She embraces her being a Hindu, her being Asian in a predominantly white area, and she was a teacher, so she teaches a lot around, understanding, racial understanding. So I think she's keen to do something. And my oldest sister, who would have had a different journey to me because she was a lot older, I think she finds it very painful. So she's never mentioned it, but she acknowledges it. So are we celebrating? I don't know. I'm reminiscing a lot. That's what I'm doing. And I'm writing my own little diary and stories, and I call it the sari because the sari was so prominent for me at that time. But very interesting question. But I appreciate that Leicester is doing a lot, and I think I will be getting involved with some of the stuff that's happening locally.
So you're reflecting quite a lot on your life. You're at a stage where you're reflecting on it all.
Very much so.
Yeah. Is this like a book that you're writing then? Or
I am. I'm not a writer because I'm so dyslexic. It's my diaries really, so it is a little bit of a book that I'm writing. But I believe my daughter is a writer, and I'm hoping that she'll pick up the baton when I finished it and it's in the raw form. I'm hoping she'll do something with it.
Is it helping you, like, with the? Would you say you suffered trauma?
Yeah, definitely. Yes, I did suffer trauma, and it is helping with the trauma. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.